Let us begin our time together by engaging in a thought experiment. Imagine that instead of being in this hotel room, we're in a time machine. And our destination today is to travel back to central Pennsylvania in the early 1700s. Our trip proceeds smoothly enough, but as we almost reach our destination, we suddenly encounter the most severe turbulence that any of us have ever experienced. After some truly gut-wrenching, terrifying moments, we somehow managed to land safely on the gentle slopes of the 18th century Commonwealth. As we sit there, we all breathe a sigh of relief. The captain comes on and informs us she has good news and bad news. The good news is, despite the obvious malfunction in our vehicle, we have managed to land safely. The bad news, well, we are 300 years in the past, and we don't have the technology to repair our vehicle. And so the captain informs us, regretfully, we are all now permanent residents of this 18th century agricultural paradise. Now, as you sit here stunned, thinking this is not the trip I signed up for, and as you begin to think about how you are going to acclimate to life in the 18th century, I have a very important question for you. How many of you will easily find a job in your current line of work? You see, in the agrarian age, there were no software developers, system engineers, computer programmers. There were no executives, managers, analysts, telemarketers, customer service representatives. There weren't even professional athletes. All of these jobs are products of the industrial age and simply didn't exist in the agrarian age. It is in this moment that you suddenly realize you're not just in a different time and place. You are in a completely different world with a completely different set of rules. Well, believe it or not, this is exactly where we find ourselves today, with the very sudden and the very rapid emergence of the new digital age. If you travel a bit, you may recall that a few years back, out in Denver's airport, they had a very thoughtful ad campaign from the University of Denver's Business School. And one of those ads read something like this: the top 10 jobs of 10 years from now don't exist today. It turns out we do not have to engage in a thought experiment, nor do we have to step into a time machine to suddenly find ourselves in a completely different world with a completely different set of rules. We just have to be residents of the early 21st century. We are on the threshold of a new business reality for which I would suggest to you most business organizations today and their business leaders are almost completely unprepared. The signs are all around them, they're in plain sight, but they cannot see them because they have been socialized into the mindset of a social technology of a 19th century management model that is rapidly losing relevance in a 21st century world. One of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge, facing business leaders today is that the world is changing much faster than their organizations. Every industry, without exception, has been overtaken by an incredible accelerating pace of change. This is what they experience. This is what they know. Everybody will agree that we are now living in a fast-forward world. That's why I call this new world the Wiki world. Wiki is the Hawaiian word for quick or fast. And if your organization is going to succeed, it has to be designed to move fast. This is a problem for the 19th century management model because it is designed to move slow. There are two other factors. I call them the unprecedented combination when we put all three of them together that have suddenly thrust us into this new world and its new rules. The first, of course, is accelerating change. The second is escalating complexity. And most business leaders haven't a clue what that's about. You see, the most important consequence of escalating complexity is it has changed the very fundamental nature of business problems. For the last 100 years, our business issues have been essentially issues of complication. What the industrial age brought with it was a complicated world. Things were not simple. In the world of work in the agrarian age, you didn't need control structures or anything like that. You had observation. I could observe everything that was happening. And if things were broken, I could see it, and we do it, and that's it, and everybody was in my sight. The industrial age brought with it a level of complication which leads to its control structures because everything isn't within your sight. Now, an issue of complication is when you have many, many, many moving parts and something goes wrong. The trick is I got to find the 4 or 5 parts that are driving the problem, and that's not always easy, which is why traditional organization relies on experts. Because experts are very good at figuring out what those 4 or 5 things are. And once we got them, now we can solve the problem. And that was usually done by this. I'm going to take issue 1 and I'm going to hand it over to this department. Issue 2, you're going to go work on that. You work on issue 3, you on 4, you on 5. And by the way, stick to your job. Keep out of each other's business. Just give it back to me. I'll put them all together and it'll work. And you know what? It did for about 100 years. What was the mantra you had heard in traditional medicine? Do your part. We assumed organizations were machines and parts could be handled separately. Today, our issues are issues of complexity, and the difference is now when we look across the millions of moving parts and find the 4 or 5 driving that, you can't solve any one out of the presence of the other. Our issues today require holistic solutions. This is a problem for traditional organizations because they're not designed to be holistic. They're not designed to be fragmented. The third element in this unprecedented combination is the element that makes the combination truly unprecedented. Because relatively speaking, we have had accelerating change and we've had escalating complexity before at the start of the industrial age. But this third factor has never existed before in human history until the last 10 or 15 years. And it is ubiquitous connectivity. For the first time in human history, we have the capacity for mass collaboration. It is possible, it is practical, it is pervasive. It means large numbers of individuals can directly and effectively work with each other without having to go through a central organization. We now live in a permanently hyper-connected world. And if your organization is going to succeed in a hyper-connected world, it has to be designed primarily for collaboration. And that is a problem for traditional companies because they are primarily focused on compliance. And so, we're suddenly in this new world with this new rules where organizations need to be designed to be fast, holistic, and collaborative, and where most of them are slow, they're fragmented, and overly focused on compliance. No wonder so many managers today feel completely overwhelmed by what seems to them to be an unmanageable state of affairs. Now, at the same time, there is a small but a definitely growing group of vanguard companies who are thriving in this time of great change. They're growing market share. They're making money. As a matter of fact, they're making more money than their traditional counterparts on average. Some of them are profits, some of them are not for profits, but they are adding people to their payrolls and people love working for them. We at Optimity Advisors were fascinated by these vanguard companies, and we wanted to understand what is it they do and how did they do it and what makes them different and why are they thriving and succeeding while other companies are having a hell of a hard time and a lot of them are starting to fall by the wayside. The companies that we looked at included companies such as Google and Gore, Linux, Wikipedia, Valve, Morningstar, Zappos, and a group that's not a company, you all. Lean, Kanban, the Agile movement is a major force for managing differently. And so we looked across these. And what we noticed is that the leaders in this vanguard group understood we were in a different world with a different set of rules. And they had mastered these rules. And in so doing, they have completely overhauled the fundamentals of management. What they understood is that a fast-forward world is not necessarily unmanageable. It just needs to be managed differently. Now, the results of our research were published by the American Management Association in the book Wiki Management that the Hillel referenced before. And we called it Wiki Management because it's management designed for the wiki world. Now, when we looked across these companies, we saw that they had 5 disciplines in common. A framework, and I want to iterate what Dave Snowden said earlier, not a recipe, but a framework, a fundamental set of principles, if you will. This framework included 5 disciplines that are rarely, if ever, practiced inside traditional hierarchical organizations. The first of these disciplines is understand what's most important to customers. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, well, that doesn't sound very new. You ask any business leader, and they're going to tell you their customers are their most important people. And you know, you're right. That's exactly what they're going to tell you, but they don't have the mechanisms to back it up. Dave Carroll is a musician who lives in Halifax, Canada. He and his band had some gigs in Omaha, Nebraska. They flew on United Airlines. They changed planes in Chicago. Dave is sitting on the second plane at the gate waiting for it to pull away when he hears some woman exclaim behind him, "Oh my God, they're throwing guitars out there." Dave looks out the window and sees his $3,500 Taylor guitar flying through the air, and he watches it crash to the ground. When he gets to Omaha and goes to bag his claim, he confirms his worst fears. He opens up the case, and sure enough, the neck is broken in 2. Now, Dave and the band have a busy schedule. Fortunately, the other instruments made it fine. Between setups and rehearsals and the gigs, it's a couple of days before Dave picks up the phone, calls the people at United Airlines and says, "I need to talk with you about the $1,200 repair for my $3,500 guitar." They ask him a few questions and say, "I'm sorry, sir, there's nothing we can do." He said, "What do you mean there's nothing you can do?" "Well, you filed your claim after 24 hours. And see, our policy is all claims must be filed within 24 hours. You see, at United Airlines, they may tell you the customers are important, but what their behavior said is what's most important in this company is what's most important to the bosses. And what their behavior said is, we're focused on the transaction, and after 24 hours, this transaction is done. So it's your problem, you deal with it." Well, Dave is a persistent guy. And he says, "No, this is wrong. You were reckless. You were irresponsible. I literally witnessed you all break my guitar, and you can't hide behind a policy." So for 9 months, he goes up the chain of command, gets all the way to the chief officer over the customer service area, and is told the same story for 9 months. "We cannot make any exceptions. If we make it for you, we'll have to make it for everybody else." All right? Dave realizes he's at the end of the line. And so he says, "Well, I guess I'm going to have to just make a YouTube video." And the VP says, "Yeah, good luck with that." Well, it turns out Dave isn't only a talented musician, he's a talented songwriter. So he writes this song called United Breaks Guitars. And in 3 days, it's got 500,000 hits. So he gets a call from the VP. He says, "Dave, we think we might have to revisit this. What will it take to get you to take that YouTube video down?" Dave pauses for a second and says, good luck with that. Today, United Breaks Guitars, the last time I saw, has over 13 million hits. Who do you think defined the brand of United Guitars? Do you think it was their brand marketing department with their large budget? Or was it Dave Carroll with his YouTube video? We live in a hyper-connected world. Dave wasn't taking that thing down. His phone was running off the hooks. He was getting more gigs than he ever dreamed he would ever get. Since that time, Dave has now got a public speaking career, and he recently published a book on customer service. By the way, if you're wondering whatever happened about his guitar, now here's serendipity in action. Out of the blue, he gets a call from Bob Taylor, the owner of Taylor Guitars. Taylor's just sitting there on the side watching all the orders come in. We live in a hyper-connected world. Serendipity winds up being very fortunate for them. He says, Dave, I'm so grateful. We'll not only send you one, we'll send you 2 replacement guitars. Contrast that with Zaz Lamar. Zaz Lamar was very close to her mom, but her mom had cancer. And as oftentimes happens with cancer patients, they lose a lot of weight. And she was very sick, and Zaz wanted to do something really special for her mom. She knows she loves shoes, so she calls up Zappos and orders 18 pairs of shoes in all different sizes and styles. Fortunately, 2 of them work. She calls up Zappos and says, I need to make arrangements to return the other 16 pair. So they say fine, and they do that. Well, after a bit of time goes by, Zappos calls Zaz and says, we noticed that we didn't get the shoes back. Is everything okay? And Zaz says, not really. My mom took an unexpected turn for the worse and unfortunately passed away. And I just haven't had time to return the shoes and comply with your policy. And the customer service representative of Zappos says, absolutely, you don't have time to do that. She says, I've been meaning to do it. I got them in the trunk of my car. And they said, I'll tell you what if we sent the UPS truck to you wherever you are? Could you take 5 minutes to take them out of your trunk of your car? She says, you would do that? And they said, sure. That's not what made this story go viral. What made the story go viral was what happened the next day. Another truck shows up, not to pick something up, but to leave something off. A delivery of flowers to Zaz from Zappos, thinking of you in your time of need. Zappos has mechanisms that says we understand what's most important to customers. Zappos walks the talk. Zappos doesn't sell shoes. They sell, as they say, happiness. Zappos isn't focused on the transaction, which they know ends. They're focused on the experience that never ends. Do you think this experience will ever end for either Dave Carroll or Zaz Lamar? In the new paradigm of management, you focus on the experience, not the transaction. And whatever little money they put out to send those flowers and to send that UPS truck out for a special delivery, do you think they got it more times back and increased sales when that story went around viral? And they didn't do it to do that. They did it because they really wanted to make a human connection. Another company that understands about what's most important to customers is Lego, and how they handled a very unusual, or rather their unusual response to a security breach. A few years back, they created this application called Mindstorm Kits, and they were really proud of it. And they put it out there in the market, and it wasn't out there 4 weeks before some student hacker gets in, breaks in, rewrites the code. They have the crisis management meeting, okay? What are we going to do about this? The lawyers right away are saying, sue, 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 sue. And somebody says, well, wait a minute, let's take a look here. And they notice 2 things. Number 1, the student hacker was not an enemy. He was a Lego loyalist. He loved Lego. And the second thing they noticed is, well, when he got in there and rearranged the program, he made it a lot better than we built it. So what was their decision? Screw the lawyers. We're going to open up the security breach, not close it. We're going to invite every Lego loyalist to come in and help us to co-create our products. And so 100,000 Lego loyalists now supplement a staff of 120 people. And here's another paradigm shift in the new management model compared to the old. If you ask somebody in a traditional bureaucratic hierarchy, what is your organization? They will tell you the people on our payroll. People in traditional hierarchies, the world of work is lived inside a company. They are more concerned with their position in the company than they are their company's position in the marketplace. Not so in the new management paradigm. They don't see their organizations as closed systems. They're open systems. Who's your organization? It includes every human being we come in contact. And if we can find a way to get customers in that, we will do that, which is exactly what Lego does. It is the best way to manage at the pace of accelerating change. Have your customers co-create your product. You'll never lose them. If they're making it, why would they go somewhere else? This is a whole different way of thinking. On January 2nd, 2001, Larry Sanger met his good friend Ben Korovitz for dinner at a small Mexican restaurant in San Diego. This is arguably the dinner that changed the world. Ben was moving to San Diego to accept a new job. Larry had moved to Southern California a year earlier to become the editor-in-chief for a new online venture by the name of Newpedia. And over dinner, Larry was sharing with Ben what a really difficult first year they had had. Despite the fact that they had assembled an incredible group of academic experts, had put in place a sterling example of the 7-step hierarchical review process that has been used to produce encyclopedias for over 200 years, at the end of year one, they had a grand total of 25 articles. Larry looked at Ben and said, at this glacial pace, this online venture won't be ready for prime time till the start of the next century. Larry wondered out loud if he had made a bad career choice. As Ben empathized with his friend, he asked him, have you ever heard of the Wiki website? And Larry said, what the hell is that? So Ben explains to him, well, and you all know what this is, of course, given the world you're in. It's this, he says, this is place that software developers have. They pool their collective knowledge, and they really write these really great programs. As a matter of fact, they're very prolific. This might be a solution for your encyclopedia. So Larry says, that sounds like a good idea. The next day he goes running into his boss's office, Jimmy Wales, tells him all about the dinner and the Wiki website. And Jimmy's reaction is, I've heard about this thing. Let's do it. So on January 10th, 2001, Wiki software is added to Newpedia, and the academics go ballistic. They say there is no role for the masses in the production of so scholarly an effort as an encyclopedia. And besides that, we are insulted and we are angry, and we will have no part of rabble-rousing with the crowd because we are highly educated, highly trained professionals. They're so vehement in their objections that Jimmy throws up his hands and says, okay, you win. And 5 days later, January 15, 2001, the Wiki software is removed from Newpedia. And the academics are pleased that they have prevailed. They have defended the honor of professionalism. Jimmy, he's not so sure. He still thinks this Wiki thing is a good idea. So he says, I'll let the academic experts have their Newpedia. He says, I'm just going to start a second project, which Larry quickly dubbed Wikipedia, and you all know the rest of this story. None of us have ever heard of Newpedia, and all of us are using Wikipedia. And in 10 years, they took a 220-year-old institution and they put it to pasture when on May 12, 2013, the Encyclopedia Britannica announced to the world that it would print no more. Larry Sanger and Jimmy Wales make an incredible leap to extraordinary performance because they discover the second discipline of wiki management. Aggregate and leverage collective intelligence. For the last 100 to 150 years, our organizations have been based on two fundamental premises, two fundamental assumptions. The first is that the smartest organizations have the smartest individuals, which is why we have built command and control structure. Because the theory is, if the smart individuals come up to the top and I give them command and control authority, then everyone will behave more intelligently than they otherwise would if left to their own devices. And it worked for over 100 years. The second assumption is that the past is a proxy for the future. And so what was the trick to being a business executive? Most business executives today are experts on yesterday. And their approach to data is they love historical data. When the past is a proxy for the future, that's a good place to be. Management's job, while they're experts on the past, management's job is always about creating the future. Now, when the past is a proxy for the future, if I understand all the data relationships here, and that's why they're so focused on linear data, then I can forecast out, and we call planning forecasting, and by golly, in a linear world, you're going to hit the mark, and you collect your bonus. Well, all that's changed. If you were to graph Moore's Law, you start in 1984 when Steve Jobs takes the computer from the institutions and makes it a household appliance. And you double, and you just, in 1984, just call our capacity to store and process information 1 unit, and then just double that every 2 years. You will watch that curve go exponential in 2004. And that is a clear picture that we are living in a different world with a different rule. The old rules worked in a linear world. And so the basis of strategy was planning, and the basis of execution was compliance, which is stick with the plan. You apply that today, you're in trouble. Because if you project out from the linear part of the curve, you're going to miss the exponential part. In this new exponential world that we're in, the two assumptions upon which we have based organizational design for over 100 years are now obsolete. The one thing we can be sure of, the future is going to look very different from the past. And so data is limited compared to what it once was. Now, I want to hasten to add right away, data continues to be important, but we need to expand our concept of data. Data is not just quantitative information. And in an exponential world, you discover that one of your best windows into what the future might possibly be, in a direction sense, is if you have the capacity to tap into the collective intelligence of your own people. The most untapped, rich resource in corporate America today, in the corporate world today, is the collective intelligence of an organization's own people. What traditional organizations lack are the processes to tap into that. What the Wiki management vanguard companies have is they do have processes to tap into it. In 1998, the last thing the world needed was another search engine. Those of you who remember, we had a crowded field of upstarts with such names as Lycos and AltaVista. And if you were a betting person in 1998, your money would have been on Yahoo. Because in 1998, how was search done? It was done by individual experts who determined the rankings of the pages. And Yahoo was amassing the best of the individual experts. Well, along come these two graduate students out of Stanford University, and they look out and they say, you know, we think the internet's going to explode over the next 10 years. And we think that there are going to be more pages than even the smartest of experts could possibly keep up with. So they have this radical, innovative idea. We're not going to rely upon individual experts to do the rankings. We're going to rely upon collective intelligence, the wisdom of the crowd. And so they built PageRight, which does that. So their fundamental operation system is a process to aggregate and leverage collective intelligence. They quickly take over the market, and they've held that strong position ever since. And of course, they start the company Google, and they design their company to be like their operating system. And they have mechanisms in place in their organization to make sure that no one has the authority to kill a good idea or keep a bad idea alive. Because if you want to be innovative, that's what you have to do. Larry Page was recently asked, why is Google so successful? He said, we're designed to adapt. They leverage collective intelligence. The third discipline of wiki management builds shared understanding by bringing everyone together in open conversations. This is a complete antithesis to what is done in hierarchical, bureaucratic organizations. One of the principles of wiki management is there is nothing as powerful as getting everybody in the same room at the same time. And when you do that, have processes to leverage their collective intelligence, but once you do that, make sure you build a solid shared understanding around what we're going to do. Because in the new wiki world, compliance is no longer the driver of execution, as it has been for the past century. Shared understanding is now the driver, because in a fast-forward world, the rules keep changing. And so you can't have compliance to rules when the rules keep changing. Shared understanding is the great enabler that helps self-directed and self-organized work happen. I learned this one firsthand when I was the chief executive of the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program. We have been using wiki management since the mid-1990s. We used it to turn around 2 decades of low growth, low performance, turn the business around in about 18 months. And what we learned to do, and the reason we were having such a hard time, is we were managing until the late 90s by the only management model we knew, which was command and control. So we kept barking out directives. But here's the problem. The Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program is not a vertically integrated business. It's a business alliance of 39 independent companies. Most people don't realize Blue Cross Blue Shield is a confederation. Every plan is an independent company, and we're delivering a seamless product to federal employees, about 4.5 million of them. And so we realized the reason that we're having so much trouble with growth and performance is because we keep barking directives, and we've spent 20 years arguing we're in charge around here. Well, maybe we need to give that notion up. You see, one of the things the wiki management companies have done is they've completely shifted the paradigm on power. Power today is no longer a function of being in charge, it's now a function of being connected. And this is what we learned firsthand. We said we have to learn to lead by connecting these organizations, by being able to get them to a shared understanding. And we've got to develop different processes for doing that. And we used it for product development. We used it for improving systems. The people used to call it the collaboration management. It was very messy, and they loved it. One of the things, when we began a project, we would really kick up the mess. It would be overwhelming. And I would keep reminding people, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what company you work for, no matter what project you're on, they all have 2 fundamental stages: order and chaos. Our only choice as the managers is a sequence. Why do so many managers keep choosing the chaos last? We chose the chaos first. That's the stuff in which you can build the collective intelligence. Well, on May 8th, 2002, I will never forget that day as long as I live, because it remains to this day the single worst day in my professional career. I had just become the program's chief executive the prior January, and when I walked into the office that morning, I was greeted by 2 very upset executives. We were putting in a new claims processing system. Now, in the health insurance industry, that is the guts of the business. That's what it's all about. And they need to be replaced about every 15 years. And we had gone 17 years with the one that we had, so we really got every bit of life out of it because we were not looking forward to doing this. The night before, we had run our first parallel test, and it was an absolute disaster. As bad as you could possibly think. But what made the executives really upset is while we knew the total system was a failure, we had no idea about the data for the individual 39 organizations. We didn't know where the problems were. And so we couldn't produce a plan. So they're beside themselves. We're going live in 8 months. The last time we put one of these in, we had a year's worth of bugs to work through. This is really looking bad. So during that sleepless night, I thought, what are we going to do? We can't put a plan together. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. We've been using this Wiki management model and leveraging collective intelligence, but we've never applied it to a crisis. So let's try it here. So the next day I called a meeting of 40 people, not just systems and operations people, all kinds of disciplines, lawyers, medical people, marketing people, people who were relationship managers with these organizations, any perspective we could find. When they walked into the room, they saw 4 flip charts in front of the room. The first one said blue, second green, third yellow, and then red. And so I explained to them, I said, our task today is we're going to take these 39 organizations, we're going to put them on one of these flip charts. Blue means if we were Rip Van Winkle and fell asleep, they'd be just fine. Green means they're probably going to be okay, but they could go off course. And if they don't have a course correction, they could be really lost. So we need to check in once in a while. I said, yellow, we have to hold their hands all the way. And red means no matter what we do, they're going to fail. I said, there'll be 2 rules for how we put these items on these flip charts. The first rule is it doesn't go up here until we have unanimous consent among all 40 of you. And the second rule is if you don't agree passionately with where we're going to put one of these organizations on these charts, even if you are one person, you have an obligation, a responsibility to come forward and to state your case, and it'll be my job to make sure it is safe for you to do that, even if you're a lone voice. Because you may see something the rest of us don't. Consensus is not about majority rules. It's about digging deep and hearing all the voices until we can get to the place and have the processes to get us there. Well, it took us 3 hours, but we got all those 39 organizations on those. And at the end of it, I said, well, here's our plan. Don't mess with the blue. We'd probably screw it up anyway. Check in every once in a while with the green. Make sure they're on course. We're going to devote all our work to the yellow. And I said, the red, you don't have to worry about that. There were 2 of them there. I said, I need to make a phone call. And that day I called 2 CEOs of 2 blue organizations, because the reason they were red is the CIO said, this is going to fail anyway. I'm not going to devote any resources to it. So 2 quick phone calls to 2 CEOs, got a message to the CIOs, if you don't devote resources, we can put somebody in your job who can. And they will move quickly from the red to the yellow. When they left the room that day, I remember this very vividly. I thought to myself, I have been a numbers person all my life. My first job was as a statistical analyst. My MBA is in finance. I'm a certified management accountant. So numbers have been there all along. I said, whatever happened in this room today was as empirically sound as a correlation analysis or a regression analysis. If I can get 40 people to unanimously agree when they are free to disagree, we have probably tapped into an important piece of data. We have tapped into an important reality. It may not be quantitative, we may not be able to put a number on it, but it is no less real. The second thing we did to build shared understanding is beginning that following Friday, and for every Friday thereafter, we had a 2-hour, what we call town hall conference call for the distributed 39 Blue Cross Blue Shield organizations. Anyone was welcome. We had designed it thinking in mind of the systems people. And the staff was instructed, do not defend anything. This is a mess, there's nothing to defend, don't waste your time. Ask questions, get every issue up there. It is okay to be a mess in May, it is not okay to be a mess in December. So let's not sugarcoat anything. Well, the issues were coming forth every week, left and right, and from that we were getting a cadence of things to do for the next one, and a totally unexpected thing happened. Business people started joining this call. And at the time in the 1990s, I mean, what is every IT department was, if we could just get the business people to show up, our life would be easier. Why do they show up? Because the word gets out there. Hey, these are really good meetings. They're really doing good stuff here, and good stuff. You can't miss these. We literally had a call every Friday afternoon involving probably at least 1,000 people. Talk about building shared understanding in a highly distributed system. So when we hit January 1, 2003, I felt fairly confident we were going to be okay. But I wound up being absolutely, totally surprised. Because unlike 15 or 17 years earlier, when we put that system in and had a year's worth of bugs to handle, we didn't have a single customer-facing issue. We had executed a flawless systems conversion in one of the most complex industries, in one of the most complex business environments you could do, all because we learned how to build shared understanding by bringing everyone together in open conversations. When you do that, our workers today are knowledge workers, and they have the ability to connect the dots between what they do and what's most important to the company. And with that shared understanding, they can adjust in real time without having to run information up and down a chain of command. The fourth discipline of Wiki management is focus on the critical few performance drivers. Companies are focused on the wrong metrics. They're focused on what's important to Wall Street. Wall Street cares about earnings per share. It cares about profitability and market share. These are all important indicators. I'm not arguing with that. And I wouldn't even disagree. As a matter of fact, I do agree. You reward people for performance on those outcome measures because we have to succeed in the marketplace. But the case I would make is those types of outcome numbers, important to Wall Street, are lousy management tools and the wrong numbers to be tracking to manage the business. What you need to do is understand what are the drivers of the outcomes. What are the key leading indicators, and focus on those. And I think a powerful tool for doing that is the balanced scorecard, but not as we've been using it for the last 30 years. Because I agree with Behaviour, who spoke yesterday, and really I think described very well how poorly misused the balanced scorecard has become. The original concept was brilliant, but it was quickly co-opted by traditional hierarchically minded, control-minded managers and a consulting industry that saw an opportunity to make a lot of money off of it by designing software. And what all of a sudden, the balanced scorecard was about strategy maps and drilling down the elements in your scorecard to the 50 things that have to be done and tracking those in time. And if you printed out the information that the balanced scorecard consultants were selling, what you would see is the world's largest organization chart. In Kaplan and Norton's original book on the balanced scorecard, the most important sentence in the book is this: the balanced scorecard is not a control system, it is a learning system. As it has been used and co-opted over the last 30 years, the controllers turned it into a control system and they completely neutralized its value. And so when we work with companies, I'd say we're going to do balanced scorecard 2.0. But 2.0 is about returning to the original concept. The original concept is you'll have no more than 12 to 20 measures. You want a combination of drivers and outcomes because you want to continually be talking about the driver and outcome relationships. All right? And as Dave Snowden said before, it's not a formula. That's the problem with the balanced scorecard consultants. They turned it into this map formula. Strategy maps mean nothing in a fast-changing world because the landscape keeps changing. If you want to manage at the pace of change, you need a compass, not a map. And the balanced scorecard is an excellent compass when you return it back to its original concept as designed. The other problem with balanced scorecard in the hands of controllers is they always put the finance section first. And Beate talked about that yesterday. And whenever we do the balanced scorecard, well, hell, the first discipline of Wiki management is understand what's most important to customers. The customer section is always first. And there's an implicit logic in this that makes sense. You start with the customer. You measure your value and their values and make sure you have a value fit. Then the second section is your business processes, your operations. Why? Once you know your value proposition, well, you've got to design operations to deliver on that proposition. And what's the third section? It's learning and growth. Everybody stumbles over this. Traditional companies, what are their learning and growth measures? How many people went to training courses? They still think that the intelligence of organizations is about, quote, quote, getting a lot of smart individuals. In the learning and growth section, what you need to be measuring is how do we learn as an organization? Are we a learning organization? And if we are, how do we know it? How do we measure it? How? Because that's our capacity to change. And what we learn is going to affect how we view customers, because customer values can keep shifting. And then we're going to have to shift our operations accordingly. Finance is the last section. And the reason it's the last, it is the only set of numbers in the balanced scorecard that consists of dependent variables. The other three sections have the independent variables. And what's the thing about dependent variables? You cannot directly influence them if you're a manager. The only things you can affect are the independent variables. That's where you can have your influence. So the beauty of the balanced scorecard is once you understand the customer, build processes to deliver, and then continually learn and grow to keep up with the pace of change, financial results are the reward you get for doing the other three things well. You see, one of the things the Wiki management companies have done is they've redefined the fundamental purpose of a business. When I was in business school, Business 101, first day, it was drilled into me. The purpose of a business is to create shareholder wealth. The Vanguard business leaders say, not only no, but hell no. The purpose of a business is to create customer value. Because if you don't have any customers, you don't have to worry about having shareholders. They understand the pathway to shareholder wealth is always through customer value. That's why they don't view business as a transaction, they do view business as an experience. You create a wonderful experience, you're going to be profitable. It is an indirect consequence of doing the right things correctly. That is the fundamental spirit of the original balanced scorecard. And to reiterate something that Dave Snowden said before, it's not a recipe. And so when we work with companies, the numbers can change over time because it is a compass and not a map. And you need, and the most important thing about the balanced scorecard is not the metrics on the card, it's the conversations that you will have about the metrics on the card. Because you have to keep testing your hypotheses. These may have been drivers to these outcomes 2 years ago, but are they still drivers today? And business leaders need to have a platform in which they're having a conversation so that they can strategically keep pace with a fast changing world. In 1958, a middle-aged engineer by the name of Bill Gore walked away from a very successful 17-year career at one of America's most prominent companies, the DuPont Company, to literally start a business in his basement. And he knew he wanted his business to be very, very different. He wanted his company to be designed for innovation. This was on his mind long before anybody ever thought about it. He noticed when he was at DuPont, the best conversations didn't happen in the office, they happened in the carpool, when people got away from the chains of command and the hierarchies. He had a clear vision for what he wanted his new company to look like. He wanted it to be like the carpool all day long. And he knew the only way he could do that is if no one in his new company, including he, the founder, could have the authority to kill a good idea or keep a bad idea alive. And so he decided in his new company there would be no organization charts, no chains of command, no protocols for communication. Because there would be no bosses, no supervisors, no managers, all work would be accepted rather than assigned, and the collective intelligence of his colleagues would decide what they do, and when they do it, they would do no formal strategic planning. This is 1958. If Bill Gore had gone to anybody who knew anything about management in 1958 and said, "What do you think of my idea?" they would have said, "You're nuts. There's no way this is going to, your company will not last a year. How will anything get done if there's nobody in charge?" Well, it turns out quite a lot can get done. Today, Bill Gore's company is a $3 billion global enterprise in 30 countries around the world. It has made a profit in every year of its existence. It is perennially on the list of the best companies to work for, Fortune's list, many years in the #1 spot. And although Bill Gore died in 1986, this company still lives on with his initial vision of building that carpool all day long. Because today, 56 years later, in 2014, at W.L. Gore & Associates, the makers of Gore-Tex and other innovative products, there are still no organization charts, still no chains of command, still no protocols for communication. All work continues to be accepted rather than assigned, and the collective intelligence of 9,500 people around the globe still decides what they will do and how they will do it. It turns out that the future of management has already arrived. It's been hidden in plain sight, and it has been around for 56 years. It's gotten company recently with companies like Google and Morningstar, and over the last 15 or 20 years, other companies have joined. But for about 3 to 4 decades, Gore stood by itself, and nobody noticed. Why? Because Gore designed his company for innovation and collaboration at a time when those were business options and not business imperatives. The business imperatives in the 1950s were efficiency and productivity. The questions that count, well, how am I cutting costs and how am I making money? That's why Gore never went public. They never wanted to be subject to the winds of Wall Street. They always wanted to be designed for innovation and collaboration. One of the new factors about this new world that we are in today is now designing companies for innovation and collaboration is no longer a business option. It is a business imperative. If you want to succeed in this world, what we learned from the Wiki management companies, they were very proactive in not building top-down hierarchies. They did this very mindfully. They have built peer-to-peer collaborative networks. They are completely counterintuitive to anybody who has been raised in a traditional management mindset because they can't get their head away from how will anything get done. The reason it works at Gore is Bill Gore put a lot of thinking into his design. He knew if he was going to go with this bossless company, there were 2 obstacles that he had to overcome. And if he could do these, he felt it would succeed. The one, how do you provide incentive for people to do more rather than less work? And how do you provide incentives for them to do the right work rather than the wrong work? And he looked around and he noticed that law firms use this collegial process to determine compensation. And so he used that as a model, and he put in place a very simple performance evaluation system that exists to this day. Everyone at Gore evaluates 20 people, and everyone is evaluated by 20 people. He set up a system designed around what is the 5th and the most difficult discipline of Wiki management, at least for traditionally minded people. You hold people accountable to their peers. So a bossless company is not a company without accountability. It just makes the accountability around the collective intelligence of 20 workers, which turns out to probably be more reliable than the judgment of a single supervisor. You set up single supervisors, you've given too many people the authority to kill good ideas, keep bad ideas at a time when you need to be designed for innovation and collaboration. It's a formula for disaster. A 19th century management model is unsustainable in this 21st century world. The way the mechanics work, and this really blows people's minds. Here's Gore's evaluation system. It probably takes less than 30 minutes for everybody to do. Anybody who's been through this process, I mean, the worst part of my job as a manager was doing those evaluations. I dreaded that every year. I mean, it's just, it is, you know, I'd rather watch paint dry. But anyway, here's what they do at Gore. You got your list of 20 people, rank them from 1 to 20, no ties in terms of your perception of their contribution to our company, and hand it in. And that's it. No, are they collaborative? Are they analytical? None of this stuff, none of these attributes. Your perception of their contribution, hand it in. No single person's observation is probably all that valid. This drives numbers people nuts. This drives the lawyers nuts. Well, the numbers people, how do we know its value? How do we know I mean, you're asking them for their judgments, okay? The lawyers, my goodness, we have no documentation. Let me tell you something. If 20 people tell you that you're doing a great job, you probably are. If 20 people tell you you're lousy, you probably are, okay? And it's hard to walk away from that. The vast majority will probably fall somewhere in there. Here's the beauty of the system. It's designed for a fast-changing world. When people knock on Gore's door, they do have a CEO. She just doesn't get to make any assignments. Her name is Terry Kelly, and they want to learn about Gore because Gore really has this great press. And she tells them about this. They go, well, but how do you know people are measuring the right things? She says, better than you. Well, what do you mean? We put a lot of effort and detail into our system. She says, yeah, but we're in a fast-changing world. How do you know in December what counted in January is still real? She says, when we ask people to judge people based on their perception of their contribution, we are implicitly picking up the things that count. And because we look at it collectively rather than a single person's judgment, we're probably tapping into an empirical reality. And so, if you want to succeed in 21st century business today, what you do is you build a network, not a hierarchy. And in doing so, you keep 5 disciplines in mind. You understand what's most important to customers, because that's the purpose of a business. Number 2, you aggregate and leverage collective intelligence, because that's what smart organizations do today, not individual intelligence. Is individual intelligence important? Absolutely. But it becomes powerful when you have the processes to take smart individuals and to integrate their intelligence. And I'm going to, if you have a hard time with this, I'm going to leave you with a quick story. It happened in the summer of 2011. There was a problem in AIDS research that the world's best scientists had worked on for 10 years. They couldn't crack it. The best individual minds in the world couldn't do it. This professor out at the University of Washington, he had built this online community called Folded for people who were interested in biogenetic problems. And here's the thing. There were no credentials for joining Folded. Anybody could. You could be a PhD candidate, or you could have been a high school dropout who had to go to work because the family needed the money. You happen to be smart and love biogenetics. So the only requirement is love biogenetics. So he puts this problem that they haven't solved in 10 years out there in the Folded community, and an incredible thing happened. They solved it in 10 days. 10 days. Nobody is smarter or faster than everybody once you have the processes to do it. The 3rd discipline, build shared understanding by bringing everyone together at open conversations. The 4th is focus on the critical few performance drivers. And the 5th is the big game changer, hold people accountable to their peers. When we began our time together today, you probably thought that our thought experiment was an imaginary exercise. But by now you know it was not. It was real. We are now permanent residents, not of an 18th century agricultural paradise, but rather a 21st century hyper-connected world. A world in which networks are smarter and faster than hierarchies, and a world in which nobody really is smarter and faster than everybody. Welcome to the Wiki world. Thank you. I've left about 20 minutes for questions because this is always the best part of this. And if you could wait for the microphone because we're recording this and this will make sure. I love the questions here and they're always good. So I think we have a question right up here.
In the organization where you had 9,500 people, the multinational, I think it was called Gore.
Gore, yes.
How could they efficiently and collectively reach a decision? Could you be a little bit more specific of their decision-making process?
You raise a good point. Number one, the first thing, as Gore developed, it worked real well when they started, and as they got to about 150 people, it started to break down. And he still resisted the temptation to put in bosses. And so part of what makes Gore work is they are a collection of separate locations that are completely autonomous that tend to have about 150 people. As soon as a place hits 200, they divide it in half and make them separate. And what they do, they work out, this is a hard, they work out their own processes and for coming to decision making. And they stay at it until it's done. The pressure to deliver because of the peer accountability winds up being a very highly efficient decision-making process. Because how do you know when you start a project? When you have enough people who start coming to the meetings. And so if you don't think it's good, you're not going to show up. And the only people who are going to show up are those who think it's worth doing, all right? And if you have an idea worth doing, you will need to take it to an internal budget committee, and you'll go back and forth, and if you can get the closure on that, you'll go forward with it. How do they kill projects? When people stop showing up. It's highly efficient. One of the big problems with organizations is I can't stop the project because I'm going to kill my performance metrics because they have been predetermined. Because Gore doesn't have predetermined performance metrics. What we're going to do is measure your contribution at the end of the period. You have this highly effective process. Again, it is counterintuitive. I can say from my own experience inside the Blues, we created a process, and this is something we're going to exhibit tomorrow in an interactive workshop, where we could collate the collective intelligence in the room in 90 minutes or under. And the trick was, and we use this in very difficult issues, no debate. What kills organizations is debate. Endless debate. Now, I do agree you need different opinions, all right? But we have a process where small groups get together and you can have your different ideas there. But once we report out, where there's no debate, and we have a mechanic that we use to get the collective intelligence, and oftentimes we would create breakthrough solutions that combine things in ways that a debate never gets you to, but combine things in ways that when I would look across the room and say, is there anyone here who cannot live with this solution? We would get unanimous consensus. I've been doing these sessions for 20 years. It may happen yet. I have yet to not get a room to unanimous consensus. It is possible if you can kill debates and if you can get to the breakthrough combination of ideas that work. But it is awfully hard to convince people of it until they see it. You've got this mechanism operating. Morningstar, some of you may have gone to the workshop that Doug Kirkpatrick did. They use letters of understanding, colleagues of letters of understanding. And so they have this process at the beginning of their business year where all of these agreements are being reached. And the pressure of having to get things done will bring them to closure. Thank you. Other questions?
Your description of Blue Cross Blue Shield being a confederation rather than a hierarchy reminded me of Dee Hock's story about the founding of Visa. Are you familiar with that? Do you see any?
We want the bank to be open 12 months a year.
Yes, yeah.
But to learn that this is very seamless, very integrated.
It is. The reason we were able to do this, we were a relatively autonomous business unit inside a larger organization that remained hierarchical. And because we had that autonomy, one of the unique skills that our senior leadership team had to have is, and when I interviewed for senior leaders, I really was looking at this, can you be bicultural? because we're going to manage in a very different type of way. And it was funny, everybody I interviewed said, I mean, at the end of the interview, they say, I really want to come and work here. I've never heard of this type of approach, and I would really like to do it. And I said, you also have to have the skills to deal with the hierarchy above us and have political savvy to maneuver well in a hierarchy. And so our leadership team had to be skilled both at Wiki management and both at traditional management, so we would be effective buffers. But the idea was the organization that reported to us didn't experience the mothership, if you will, that their experience of work was this highly collaborative networked environment. We had the lowest turnover rate by far of any division within the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. People turned down offers for more money to continue to work for us because it really does matter how Monday morning feels. And there is a premium that we would get paid as an employer because we were a not-for-profit company, so we couldn't, necessarily compete with for-profits. But I saw that play out. Yes.
Does any of this change depending on the industry type? Knowledge worker-based industry versus, let's say, purely manufacturing?
I think that's a great question. And I think it equally applies no matter what your circumstance is. Morningstar is a tomato processor. They're in the business of manufacturing. Gore produces clothing. They manufacture. And so, a lot of people, when I do this, say, well, this will work in services, but could never work in manufacturing. And I'm saying, I'm sorry, but the first company, the first wiki management company on the planet is a manufacturing company. It can apply in any environment. And, as we heard in the workshop with Doug Kirkpatrick, for those of you who were there, they became the world's largest tomato processor, and he felt that a driving factor of that was because of how they managed. It helped make that happen. Yeah. Yes?
I had a comment and a question. The comment is the collective intelligence and the efficiency behind everything just makes me think of the Borg from Star Trek. That was just a comment. But my question is, it's just human nature in every organization. Every now and then, somebody is going to fall a little bit behind in performance or maybe have personal issues that are affecting their performance at work. That's just how human beings are. And if there is no hierarchy and if people are accountable to 20 peers, when that happens, how do disciplinary turnarounds happen? Have there been any terminations? If there are, how do they happen? How does that work in your system when such things happen?
Two quick comments. First on the Borg. This is the complete opposite of the Borg. In the Borg, there's no diversity of thinking. Okay? In collective intelligence, you need the diversity. James Surowiecki wrote this wonderful book called The Wisdom of Crowds, which I read after I left Blue Cross Blue Shield. And when I read it, I said, that's why our processes worked. I understood the dynamics. You have to have diversity of opinion. You have to have independent thinking. People have to be free to express their opinion. You need a lot of local knowledge. And that's a problem for traditional managers because ivory tower decisions today are very dangerous because the action's happening locally. But it's the fourth thing that you have to have an aggregation mechanism. And our processes did have these aggregation mechanisms. That's why PageRank works. It's got all those four elements. And that's why Google is one of the most successful practitioners of collective intelligence, because they have the four elements that Surowiecki talked about. In terms of disciplinary issues, what I noticed was poor performers remove themselves because peer pressure is far more effective than supervisor pressure. All right? And this is, and when lawyers say, we have no documentation if you do it this system, I say, you're not going to need it. You need documentation when your fundamental performance system is one-on-one. Because one-on-one is adversarial, and one-on-one can oftentimes become the supervisor has it in for me. When 20 people are telling you, you're not delivering, you're either going to change or you're going to get out of there. And it is incredibly effective. When we applied we had to apply similar mechanisms because we had to stick within the performance structure as it is. But we found a way in which we held people accountable to their peers. And we didn't have to put one person on a performance program because the poor performers left on their own. And that's what happens. Yeah. It's Wiki management. Yeah. I think there was another question. Yes.
Frode Odegaard. So this is very, very interesting work, I think. And so I thought it was so strange that someone remarked that this should be harder to do for people in manufacturing, because you would think that for knowledge-intensive organizations, the amount of information, complexity, uncertainty, and change that they deal with is higher. So you think it'd be easier for manufacturing, which are lower clock speed businesses generally, with less uncertainty and often less flexibility.
That's a good point. Here's what's interesting. In making this transition, and I think most traditional organizations are not going to make the transition. It's easier for the workers. It's harder for the managers. Because you raise this identity question. If I am not in charge, who am I? If I am not in charge, how am I going to continue to make big money? Now, what they don't understand, in adapting this myself, I had to change my inner psychology as far as what were my psychological payoffs. And I was the chief executive of the business, but I didn't make any more decisions. Because why would I substitute my point of view when we had the power to tap into collective intelligence, and those ideas were far better than I could ever come up with. And so my job was to follow that. But that is a hard transition to make, but it is a critical one. I unfortunately think that the way this is going to play out is rather than a conversion of companies, we're going to see a displacement of companies. And I believe it's already being played out. But we hardly notice it because we love what comes in its place. So for example, how many of you are missing Borders now that we have Amazon? How many of you are missing Blockbusters now that we have Netflix? Do you pine away for the Encyclopedia Britannica now that you have Wikipedia? Are any of you longing for the days of Tower Records when we have iTunes? Okay? This is likely what's going to, I think we're going to see some very big name companies that are going to stun us, fall by the wayside. The single greatest threat to most companies today comes not from the marketplace, but from their own managers who cannot make this transition. The workers can make it easily. And in a manufacturing environment, if you give the workers the freedom, they're the ones close to it. We've learned that with Toyota over all these years. The foundations of your work in Lean. Any other questions? Yes.
Rod, not a question, but a comment. I think it's interesting that I've heard this question over and over again. How do we take care of the poor performers in this new world or new way of working? And you hit it right on the head. They'll remove themselves. But the other message, and you just echoed it right now, is the message for managers in this room or managers you know. If you don't get this message, good performers also remove themselves. And I think that's important to consider as well.
I think that's a very good point. I only had one person leave from the senior leadership team. And she said, I just can't stay around here because I have to have control to manage. And so, and so she left, okay? But she, from our standpoint, she was not a good performer. But she wound up leaving. When you have a low turnover rate, that's a sign you're keeping your good performers. And that's what we had in this case. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi. What about government? I've worked in your industry for a while and there's a lot of compliance, so people are running around getting compliant, and I'm in the Agile community and I'm trying to kind of steer them away from that. How can government actually incentivize the upper management to change their behaviors? Because I think that's where the crux of the matter is.
That's a great question. And I think government may be slow to come along, but will have to. And let me draw upon my own experience, because I often tell people, while the government is the most bureaucratic institution on the face of the planet, Blue Cross Blue Shield was number 2. And so if you can do it inside Blue Cross Blue Shield, what we did, I think if somebody is in government service and wants to apply these principles, you need to have 2 conditions. And if you have these conditions, I think you can do it. Number 1, you have to have the wherewithal to get everybody in the same room at the same time. Whether they report to you or not doesn't count. Will they be willing cohorts in what you want to do? If you have everyone reporting to you, that's great. So, because I was the chief executive of the unit, I had that. So that was easy to do. But I actually started doing this before I got into that role. And I could get people together and say, are we willing to do that? And the second thing is you need enough autonomy that you can operate relatively independently. If you've got those, you can do it. And what you'll do is you'll find creative ways to stick with the procedures and rules in your system. David talked about it before. You know, people find ways to build networks to help the company succeed despite itself. And I think you can do that too. What we need to do, what's so unfortunate is most companies are really staying above water because they have an informal network of really savvy people who are operating under the radar. Could you imagine how much more powerful that would be if they were the core as opposed to the hidden? That's what's so difficult, you know, so hard. Now, a couple of traditional companies have made the conversion. IBM made it. They almost died in the process, but they did. And Ford is on the road to doing it. And I think even with Alan Mulally just announcing he's moving on, he's probably done it at a time that I think that the system that he has put in place will continue on. There have been a lot of companies who have tried this, and here's the danger of doing it in a hierarchy. All right, and I just finished reading John Cotter's book where he talks about the solution is a dual operating system, have a network next to a hierarchy. And I can relate to that because that's what we did in the blues. Saturn did that. Lincoln did that inside Ford, and NUMMI inside General Motors. But every one of those in the automotive industry, once the leaders moved on, the hierarchy quickly came in. It's like the old analogy of the frog and the spider. You know, despite the deal that we'll get across the river, the poisonous spider does bite the frog, and when the frog says, "Why did you do that?" he says, "It's in my nature." And it's in the nature of hierarchies to be controlling. And that's why I think Gore and Morningstar and Valve is another bossless company. Google, and it's important to see, Google does this with bosses. Now, Google tried to go bossless, but they got pushback from an unusual place. It was the workers, not the managers. And so Brin and Page, why do you want, we thought you'd be happy. They said, no, we want mentors, we want referees, which is the question you raised earlier. So what did they do? 60-to-1 ratio, because you can't micromanage 60 people, and the 20% time rule. Every worker gets to self-direct 20% of the time, and you do not have to tell your supervisor what you're working on. So they used different mechanics to make sure people couldn't kill good ideas, keep bad ideas alive. Google is one of the only places in the planet where you can disobey a direct order from the CEO, which an engineer did when he was told not to create a certain pop-up solution because Larry Page thought it was a stupid idea and told him so and said, don't take it personally. Guy builds it anyway, puts it on Larry's computer as the beta test. When Larry says, I don't know what's happened, my computer is just terrific, the engineer fesses up. He says, but I told you not to work on it. And he smiles and says, yeah, but I worked on it my 20% time. And so he gets a bonus for it. When systems are like that, you're thwarting control. That's the danger of the dual operating system. I don't think it's sustainable, but I think companies are going to have to do it to avoid death. What was it? I was in a workshop yesterday with Java, I hope I'm saying this right, Java Bloom, said when the time to recover is greater than the time to survive, you're dead. And that is the situation that a lot of businesses are in today.
We have any further questions? I'd just like to point out just the last question. So governments tend to be large, and where successes are had are in the small, contained environments within governments. So you're not going to be able to change the entire government, especially when there's politics involved, especially in, say, a country as large as ours, which is a governing body as big as ours. But if you have a government environment, that doesn't make it impossible. There are ways of changing a particular environment. You can change a department or a ship or an agency piece by piece, but not as government. But anyway, any other questions?